Smile, be, chat, join for networking.
18 years old, waking up with the most incredible of headaches, almost hangover-like. Chained to the bed with a beautiful lady stood by the side of me. Every teenager's fantasy. Yet this wasn't fantasy, this was real life. And the lady by the side of me was a police officer and the chains were handcuffs. And I was laying in a hospital bed after being arrested for arson at the age of 18. Let me take you back quite a few years to understand the journey on how I got arrested just after my 18th birthday. 5 years old, St. Joseph's Primary School, Catholic Primary School in Salford. Every morning, the priest would walk from the Catholic church over to my primary school, to my class, take me by the hand and lead me back to the church. Now we all read the newspapers, so it doesn't take a genius to work out what happens next. That would be, had you prejudged the situation. I was actually one of the youngest altar boys in the whole of the UK. And at the age of 5 years old, I served my first funeral. Up until the age of 19, I'd actually served at over 5,000 funerals. And so it's fair to say that I was quite comfortable around death. At the age of 8, I was a grief counsellor. Adults used to come to me and sit next to me on the pew and they would pour their heart out. And I would listen for what seemed like hours. And the one common thread throughout the whole of the conversations that I used to have was regret. They all talk about how their husband or their wife or their child wished they had done something, yet they never got round to doing it. I stand here in front of you trying to express unto yourselves that we all need to turn those shoulds into musts. We need to live out our dreams, because there is no dreams to be had once you're in that box going 6 feet under. A year later, at the age of 9, my mum and my dad had a bit of a violent relationship, mainly on my dad's side, and it was becoming quite prominent that there was going to be splitting up. And so the next door neighbours, Bob and Sheila, knew on this particular day that my mum and my dad were going to be splitting up on that day. So they took me to the woods for a day out so I could avoid the situation. But me, always the awkward child, I was the youngest of 3, I decided to have diarrhoea this day. And so Bob and Sheila took me back to the house, and what I saw that night, I won't wish on anybody. My mum was cowering, blood on her face, and my dad raining the blows to the side of her head. Within seconds of me opening that door, my mum ran right past me, and I ran after her, all the way down to the end of the road to Regent Road in Salford, which was a huge main road, somewhere a 9-year-old shouldn't be. And I was pleading, I was crying, asking for my mum to come back and talk. She didn't say a single word until she got on the bus and turned round and said bye. As a 9-year-old, I was stood on this main road, tears going down my face, and I started to walk back. And to the right of me, there was some masonettes called Paddock Field. And I felt instantly drawn to these masonettes. And I climbed over the security barrier, and I sat there for about 3 hours just crying, trying to make sense of what the hell I've just seen. My dad didn't even notice I'd gone. And so moving forward a few years to the age of about 14, as I mentioned earlier, I was quite an awkward child, quite an independent child. I always thought my dad loved my elder brother and my mum loved my sister, and I was just that inconvenience. And so I used to do a lot of things on my own. I was always very independent. And where I grew up, it was a place called Odsall, which bordered Salford Docks, just down the road from here, and just by the Manchester Ship Canal. And I was very fortunate as a young child to remember the docks as they used to be, with the ships coming in, and the pea soup fog, and the New Year's Eve with the foghorns. And I used to go over to the docks, and I used to just sit there watching the workers. And I knew that Salford was a special place. I knew it was one of those places that would never ever leave me. Yet my dad wanted me to leave Salford. My dad wanted me to be a better person because he felt if I stayed in Salford, I would not be a better person. So at the age of 16, you went one of three ways. I left school, you went one of three ways. You can either leave Salford and escape the chaos. There was a lot of crime, a lot of deprivation, a lot of unemployment. Or you became one of the criminal gangs. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to stay in Salford and make it a better place. I wanted to be a volunteer. I wanted to build a childcare centre. My dad had different ideas. He wanted me to become an accountant. I could not think of a worse position to be in. And so for several years we used to fight, and I took the place of my mum and I used to get the beatings. And so at the age of 16, November the 11th, 1990, at 11 o'clock at night, I'd just come from the biggest beating that I'd had in the previous 2 years. Blood all over my face, my nose was snotty, I looked an absolute disgrace. And my dad was still raining blows on my head because I said for at least 1,000th time that I did not want to be a fucking accountant. And so at that moment, he told me to get out the house. And as I walked out the door, I went to the gate and I turned around and I saw my dad turn the lights off and went to bed. I knew at that point my life was going to change. And for some strange reason, I knew it was going to change for the better. Because I'd had this weight lifted off my shoulder. I was free to do whatever I pleased. So that night, it was lashing down with rain, going into the blood on my face, it was all getting congealed. And in front of me, I saw this brick bin shed. And that is where I spent the first night as a 16-year-old. Crawled into the bin shed, spiders crawling over my face and the cobwebs. And I stayed up for 9 hours just crying. By the time I walked out of there, about 7 o'clock in the morning, I had this resolve built up inside of me. And I knew that this should not be wasted, this opportunity. And it seems strange standing here saying that being thrown out of my house was an opportunity, but that is how I felt. Because I had the chance now to actually try and establish this childcare centre. It didn't even dawn on me the fact that I was actually homeless, stood in the only pair of clothes that I actually owned, trying to get this childcare centre open. So for a year, I was knocking on doors of businesses and offices and residence houses asking for funding for this childcare centre. And I wanted the children of Salford, of Odsall, to have just 2 hours a night where they could be themselves, where they could be inspired, where they could actually do the homework away from their extended family and the babysitters who just happened to be Uncle Bob, the armed robber, or Uncle John, the local thief. 1991, after 12 months of hearing over 3,000 no's, I'd received 20 yeses, and in 1991, I actually got this childcare centre established and set up. I was still living rough. I was living above drug dealers' squats. I was living in bin chute areas of disused masonettes. And so I stood, and apologies to the councillors in the room, but I stood with Salford Council when to hand over the keys to this childcare centre because I knew I took it as far as I could. I was emotionally drained at this point. And I turned round to these men in suits. I thanked everybody, but I turned around to these men in suits, these councillors, and said, and thank you for saying no at least 8 times. Because if it wasn't for people like you who are there paid to actually treat these children of the estate to better things, such as childcare centres, I wouldn't have had the resolve to keep on going, to keep on going, to keep on going. And so I handed the keys over, and within 3 months, they got shut down because they didn't have my passion, they didn't have my why. So our lesson for you all there is nurture your baby and keep going and keep it sustainable. So when you do have an exit strategy, it still carries on and leaves your legacy. And so at the age of 18, I'd managed to get myself a job and a place in a homeless hostel in Salford Precinct called Waltz Greenwood Court. And my flatmates happened to be an ex-armed robber, a drug dealer and a thief. And I got myself a job as a telemarketer. Now, fortunately, it was before the age of the auto dial-up because I never made one phone call in those 2 days that I was employed. I used to pretend to phone and pretend to speak. I never made one sale. I hated it. And I'm not one of these motivational people that say, stick with something you hate, just get the hell out of there and try and find your passion and your why in your life. And so I went back into this telemarketing place and I had this huge argument with them, and I turned around and said, I'm going to see this place go up in smoke. Meaning, I'm going to take you to court for my 2 days' worth of money, which is laughable now. But because of the people that I was mixing with at the time, I could have quite easily looked at these people, these scum of the earth, what a lot of people would have called them, and just stayed in my flat and escaped that whole world. But I embraced it. I tried to understand why this drug dealer was a drug dealer. I tried to understand why this man was compelled to go and terrify local bank people. And so, as a result of that, they used to call me straight ahead because I would never take drugs, I would never do any alcohol or anything like that. I was always very polite and respectful, and they reciprocated that with their friendship. And I do consider them friends at the time. And so, moving forward, because I'm conscious of time, I'd managed to finally get an eye operation because I've got issues with my eyes, as you can probably tell. That's why I wear the crazy glasses, to divert attention from my eyes. And I managed to get this eye operation at Bolton Hospital, and my dad heard about me being seriously underweight. I was malnutrition. I was in hospital several times. And so he said, come and stay with me for a few months. And so this one morning, 7:30 in the morning, I was washing my face and I get this knock on the door. And it was Salford CID. And I heard the words asking for David Heffernan. And I went downstairs and I just knew again my life was over. I don't know why, because I wouldn't have a clue why the CID. Anyway, they said the words that I was arrested for arson, you don't have to say anything, we wish to do so, etc., etc. And my dad pulled me to the side and said, Dave, did you do it? And I said, Dad, you threw me out because I wanted to be a volunteer, not because I wanted to be an arsonist. And he turned around and said, I will support you. Now that gave me the strength instantly to face whatever was in front of me at that time. And so my dad said, he's going for an eye operation, can you please let him have this operation before you start questioning him? And that is why I woke up in the bed with the handcuffs. And so for 4 months I was answering bail, and I was facing 7.5 years in prison. And Salford police at the time had a very, very, very bad reputation. Evidence wasn't always key to securing a conviction back in the day. And so I was panicking. I was facing 7.5 years in prison. And there's people in this room, there's people outside of this room who live in imaginary prisons. Yet you've all got the keys to open that door and release yourselves from that prison. Yet we stay stuck in the confines of our comfort zone. We need to break free from our comfort zone and do whatever, again, makes you happy. And so after 4 months of answering bail, I get told you can go, you're cleared. I said, well, I need a bit more than that. You've just pretty much ruined my life. I said, well, somebody's owned up to it. I said, well, who's that? I said, well, we can't give you any more information, but you can go. So a couple of weeks later, I was walking around Salford Precinct and I met this girl who used to live above me in the flats. And we got talking about my journey and my arrest. I said, oh, that was such and such, the drug dealer who you lived with. I said, all right, okay. He said, yeah, he found, he said, he actually did the arson. He actually went into your workplace on your behalf and he actually set it on fire. I said, oh, that's nice of him. He could have told me that beforehand. I would have told him no. And so this is the thing. As soon as he heard Straight Ed had gone down for something he didn't do, he went to that police station and he confessed to the arson. And he said his words, and I quote, I cannot accept somebody so straight going down for something he didn't do. And he released me from that 7.5 years, and he put himself in that place and he got 7 years for it. Now I take you back to my Salford Council and the men in suits who were there to protect people like me who royally screwed me over. Yet the scum of the earth stood up when it mattered and released me from this imaginary prison, from this very real prison in my mind. So just closing down now, we're all in networking and we all prejudge. I prejudge, everybody prejudges. And I just would love to tell you about my first time at a phone networking meeting, because this just sums up why you should not prejudge. And so the first meeting, I won't mention the group, Frodsham. I went over to an accountant type bloke, and unfortunately I had a utility warehouse on my placemat rather than speaker. And before I even got to him, he said, "No, I'm not interested in your type." I said, "What do you mean? I'm not interested in your type." I said, "Well, you'll spam me, you'll do this, you'll mither me. I'm not interested, seen your type before." So, well, first of all, I'm not here for utility warehouse, I'm here as a speaker. And B, can I just ask you a couple of questions? I said, "Well, yeah, go on." I said, "Would an audience with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne, at the time, would that benefit your business?" I said, "Well, of course it would." I said, "Well, what about the Lord Lieutenant David Briggs, the Queen's envoy for Cheshire? The guy who actually sets up the events for the Queen and walks her by the hand around the whole of Cheshire while she's in this area." I said, "Well, of course it would." I said, "Well, you're just giving up a chance for a one-to-one with those two people because I know them personally." His words were, "Oh, we can have a coffee afterwards." My words were, "You can fuck off." And so the irony of this is for the next month, I received email after email, message after message, phone call after phone call from this guy asking for a coffee. And my words to him were, "I don't like you type. Will you stop spamming me?" And I blocked him on the phone. So I'll leave you with this, please. Everybody in the room, moving forward, everybody is the same. Don't sell to the room, sell through the room, because you just don't have a clue who people know, what their story is, whether we're having a bad day that day or having a good day that day. It doesn't matter. We're all human beings, we're all decent people, and as long as you treat the decent people as decent people and the bad people as decent people, it will pay you back tenfold. Thank you.
Smile, be chat, join for networking.